Welcome to LexTalks, Legal Topics Simplified, your companion for exploring the fascinating world of law.
Absolutely.
Today we're diving deep into a topic that's crucial for you, our law students in India,
Yeah.
the role of governors in our states.
It's a topic that's often shrouded in mystery, isn't it?
It is.
We hear about governors in the news, but their actual powers and limitations are often misunderstood.
Exactly, and that's where our deep dive comes in.
Right.
We've gathered some fascinating sources, from legal articles to official government websites, to help us unpack this complex role.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle,
Yeah.
using these sources to reveal the full picture of how governors operate within our democracy.
All right, so let's start with the basics.
Sure.
We know that the governor is the head of a state's executive branch appointed by the president.
Right.
Article 153 of the Constitution lays that out pretty clearly.
That's right. But here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
They're not quite like a president or a prime minister.
Yep.
One source, an article from a legal website, compares them to a constitutional monarch.
A constitutional monarch.
Yeah.
So they have the position, but not necessarily all the power.
Think of it like the Queen of England.
Okay.
She holds a formal position,
Right.
but the real power lies with the elected parliament.
So if the governor doesn't wield the true executive power, who does?
That power rests with the Council of Ministers, who are elected by the people of the state.
So in essence, the governor is a figurehead.
Mm-hmm.
It's a symbolic leader.
Not entirely. They do have specific powers and responsibilities outlined in the Constitution, but for the most part, they act on the advice of the Council of Ministers.
Okay.
One source, a document from the governor's secretariat of a northern state, explains that the governor is bound by the decisions made by the elected government.
Okay, so that clarifies their position in the executive branch.
Yes.
But what about their role in other areas of government, for example? What about appointing the chief minister?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
While technically the governor has the authority to appoint the chief minister, they're obligated to choose the leader who has the majority support in the legislative assembly.
So they can't just pick their favorite candidate.
Not at all. They have to follow the democratic process and appoint the leader who has the confidence of the elected representatives.
That makes sense. It ensures that the will of the people is reflected in the government. But what about those situations where things get a bit tricky? Say there's no clear majority in the assembly or there's a political crisis.
All right.
Does governor have any say then?
Now you're getting into the fascinating area of discretionary powers.
Okay.
It's a concept discussed in several of our sources, including a piece from a prominent legal blog.
Uh-huh.
These are powers where the governor can act independently without being bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers.
So in those moments of uncertainty or crisis, the governor can actually step in and make a decision.
Exactly. And one of the most significant discretionary powers is the ability to act if there's a breakdown of the constitutional machinery in the state.
It's like a safety valve, ensuring that the state doesn't descend into chaos if the government can't function properly. Wow, that's some serious power.
Yeah.
It sounds like the governor has a much more active role than just being a symbolic figurehead.
They do, and we're just scratching the surface. There are many other fascinating powers and responsibilities we'll explore as we delve deeper into the world of governors.
This is already so insightful. I'm eager to uncover more about these powers, especially those discretionary powers sound particularly intriguing.
I agree. And the best part is we have some amazing examples and legal nuances from our sources that will really bring these concepts to life.
All right, then, let's dive in.
Let's do it. Let's start with one that might surprise you. Pardons.
Pardons like a get-out-of-jail-free card. I thought that was the president's domain.
Well, Article 161 grants governors a similar power.
Oh,
They can pardon, reprieve, or commute sentences, just like the president can under Article 72.
So they have the authority to overturn a court's decision. That's a lot of power.
It is, but it's not unlimited. An analysis from a constitutional law expert on a well-known legal website highlights some key differences between the governor's and the president's pardon powers, for instance. The president has the exclusive power to pardon death sentences. Governors can't do that on their own.
That makes sense. It maintains a balance between the state and central authority. What other fascinating powers do governors have? I'm curious about their interaction with the state legislative assembly.
That's where it gets really interesting. Governors have a significant influence over the legislative process. They can summon and prorogue the House, meaning they decide when the assembly meets and when it takes a break.
So they control the legislative calendar.
In a way, yes. And it doesn't stop there. They can even dissolve the entire assembly, calling for fresh elections.
Wow, that's a powerful tool. It sounds like they could use that to influence the political landscape of the state.
You're catching on, and that's why this role is so fascinating. These powers are laid out in Articles 174, 175, and 176, and they highlight the delicate balance between the governor's authority and the democratic process.
Okay, so they control when the assembly meets
Yeah.
and can even dissolve it. What about their role in the actual lawmaking process? What happens when the assembly passes a bill?
That's when the governor's power of assent comes into play. They have three options:
Okay.
give their assent, making the bill a law,
Uh-huh.
withhold their assent, effectively vetoing it,
Okay.
or reserve the bill for the president's consideration.
So it's not just a rubber stamp. They have genuine decision-making power over whether a bill becomes law.
Exactly. And it's not always a straightforward decision. Sometimes a governor might believe a bill is unconstitutional or detrimental to the state's interests. In such cases, they can withhold assent.
But wouldn't that create a conflict with the elected assembly?
It certainly can, and that's why the governor's role is often at the heart of political debates. There's always a tension between respecting the will of the elected legislature and ensuring that the Constitution is upheld.
That's a fascinating insight. It really underscores the complexity of the governor's position they have to navigate a delicate balance between various branches of government.
Precisely, and it's not just about laws and the legislature. Governors also play a significant role in financial matters.
Oh, really? Like, what do they have control over the state's budget?
Not exactly control, but they do have important responsibilities. For instance, according to an article from a leading financial news website, they have to recommend the consideration of bills involving expenditures. It's like a financial checkpoint,
Mm.
ensuring that spending proposals are carefully reviewed.
That makes sense. It adds another layer of accountability to the process.
Right, and they also ensure that financial statements are properly presented to the Assembly, promoting transparency in the state's finances.
So they're not just focused on the legal side of things. They're also involved in the financial health of the state. It's amazing how multifaceted this role is. We've covered pardons the assembly and financial matters. What else is on the governor's plate?
Well, one power that often grabs headlines is the ability to promulgate ordinances. Think of it like a fast-track lawmaking process for urgent situations.
So if there's a sudden crisis, the governor can just enact a law without going through the assembly.
Not quite. It's more like a temporary measure. The governor can issue an ordinance, but it has a limited lifespan as explained on a government portal. The ordinance must be presented to the assembly for approval when it reconvenes, otherwise it expires.
That's a good safeguard. It prevents the governor from bypassing the legislature altogether.
It's fascinating how the Constitution has these built-in mechanisms to ensure checks and balances. What other intriguing powers does a governor possess?
How about this? Governors have a say in judicial appointments. They provide input and recommendations for the selection of high court judges. Wow, they're involved in shaping the judiciary as well. So their decisions could have a lasting impact on the legal landscape of the state.
Absolutely. And there's one more power that often sparks debate: the power of nomination. Governors can nominate members to both the Legislative Assembly and the Council.
So they have a direct hand in shaping the composition of these legislative bodies.
They do, for instance, if they feel a particular community is underrepresented, they can nominate a member from that community to ensure diverse voices are heard.
That's a fascinating aspect of their role. It highlights their responsibility to safeguard the interests of all communities within the state.
Exactly. It's all part of upholding the principles of inclusivity and fairness that are enshrined in our Constitution.
This is incredible. We've barely scratched the surface, and I'm already amazed by the sheer breadth of the governor's powers. But with all this authority, there must be some limitations, right?
You're absolutely right. We can't just focus on the powers without understanding the checks and balances that prevent their misuse.
Okay, so let's talk about those limitations. What prevents a governor from going rogue and acting like a dictator?
Well, the most significant safeguard is the fact that in most cases, the governor is bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers. This ensures that they can't act unilaterally and that their actions are in line with the decisions of the elected government.
So they can't just override the will of the people.
Not at all. Their role is to uphold the Constitution and ensure the smooth functioning of the government, not to impose their personal preferences.
That's reassuring, but what about accountability? If a governor does something wrong, can they be held responsible for their actions?
That's a great question. It's a topic that's often debated, and there are specific provisions in the Constitution that address this issue.
Okay, let's dive into that because I'm curious to know how the system ensures that governors don't abuse their power. What are the mechanisms in place to hold them accountable? So we've established that governors have significant power, but also that there are checks and balances in place. What happens when those checks fail? can a governor be held personally accountable for their actions?
It's a tricky area, and a research paper from a legal journal sheds light on it. Article 361 of the Constitution grants governors immunity from criminal and civil proceedings during their term. This means they can't be prosecuted while in office.
So they have complete legal protection that sounds like it could be problematic.
Well, it's a safeguard designed to ensure that they can perform their duties without fear of frivolous lawsuits or political pressure. However, the Supreme Court has clarified that this immunity doesn't last forever.
Ah, so they're not completely off the hook.
Not at all. Once their term ends, they can be prosecuted for actions committed while in office. It's a delayed accountability mechanism, but it ensures that no one is above the law, even governors.
That makes sense. It balances the need for them to act decisively with the principle of accountability. This entire discussion has been incredibly insightful. We've uncovered a lot about the powers and limitations of governors. But one thing that keeps coming up is the potential for political influence.
It's a valid concern and a topic that's often hotly debated, unlike the president who is elected governors are appointed by the central government. This has led to concerns about whether governors can truly act independently, especially when there might be pressure from the center.
So there's a worry that governors might be swayed by the political agenda of the party in power at the center, that they might prioritize the center's interests over those of their state.
Exactly. And there have been instances throughout India's history that have fueled this debate. There was a fascinating case in the 1980s, highlighted in a documentary we found, where a governor dismissed a state government, and many saw it as a politically motivated move orchestrated by the central government.
It's a reminder that while the Constitution provides a framework, the actual implementation of these powers can be complex and subject to interpretation.
It certainly is. And it's a reminder that as law students, it's crucial for you to not just understand the letter of the law, but also the context in which it operates.
Absolutely. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. We've learned about the governor's powers, their limitations, and the delicate balance they have to maintain. It's a role filled with challenges, controversies, and immense responsibility. What are your final thoughts on this for our listeners who are just beginning to grapple with these complex legal issues?
I would say this: the role of a governor is a microcosm of our democracy itself. It reflects the tensions, the compromises, and the constant struggle to balance power and accountability as you continue. Your legal studies keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving for a deeper understanding of how our system works.
Well said. It's been an absolute pleasure unraveling the mysteries of the governor's role with you today. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
The pleasure was all mine.
Thank you for listening to LexTalks. Follow, subscribe, and stay notified to never miss an episode.